here today. We are recording this for folks who can't be here with us today. My name is Sarah Newell. I'm with the Worker-Driven Social Responsibility Network. Hello to those I haven't met. Welcome back to those who were with me in the last panel. I am filling in for a coworker who was going to facilitate and was no longer available. So thanks for spending a few hours this afternoon with me. Very excited to introduce our panel of experts here to talk about the worker-driven social responsibility model and all of the different ways this model is different than other approaches to labor rights and the different ways it can be applied and adapted to different environments. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce our panelists. I'm going to read brief bios for each of them, and then I'm going to turn it over to each of them in turn to tell us about their experiences in unique geographies and industries adapting the WSR model. So let me start by introducing Gerardo Reyes Chavez, who is a key leader. That's Gerardo, hello. A key leader of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, also known as the CIW, mobilizing communities across the world to advocate for the rights of exploited workers. Through CIW's Fair Food program, Gerardo has facilitated unique partnerships among farmers, farm workers, and retail food companies to ensure humane wages and working conditions for the workers on participating farms. Gerardo leads workers' rights education programs, as well as managing the complexities of complaints of abuses in the fields, wage theft claims, and investigating cases of modern-day slavery. Thank you for being here with us today, Gerardo. I'm also excited to introduce Abel Luna of Migrant Justice. Abel Luna began working as a farm worker at 15 years old. He later worked with the Rural and Migrant Ministry in New York, winning legislative victories for agricultural workers. Now Abel is campaign coordinator for Migrant Justice, an organization founded and led by immigrant farm workers in Vermont that leads campaigns for human rights and economic justice, including developing the Milk with Dignity program that we'll hear more about later today. Lastly, I want to introduce Doug Mork. Doug spent many years organizing garment and textile workers in the South and packing workers in the Midwest. He served as a pastor in several Twin Cities churches for more than 20 years and as the interim director of Interfaith Worker Justice in Chicago. He's now the executive director of the Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council, which aims to set the standards for and monitor the development of a Twin Cities construction industry that advances the human rights of workers. Thank you to all three of you for being here with us today. Gerardo, I would love for you to kick off the session by talking a little bit about the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and the worker-driven social responsibility model.
Of course, thank you very much for having us, Sarah. And I don't know if everybody can hear me, but I wanted to start by sharing a little bit through a PowerPoint that we have. I'm going to see if I can make it work. I'm not very good at technology, but we'll see. So I don't know if you can see it.
Yep, perfect.
Very good. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers started in 1993, and for about a decade, we were basically focusing on changing the mentality of the growers to be able to push them, sit at the table and talk about how to eliminate conditions of wage theft, situations of violence in the fields, sexual harassment, the most extreme of situations, conditions of modern day slavery happening in the fields, and wages that were stagnant for more than 30 years. A bucket like this one that you see in your screen, when full with tomatoes, was paid 40 to 45 cents. And that was since 1978, more than 30 years, the same payment for the bucket. That meant that a worker in a day would have to pick 2.5 tons of tomatoes just to make the equivalent of minimum wage. Whenever minimum wage increase, the pressure on workers to harvest faster increases too. So the coalition has been fighting. There's been many actions that took place during the 90s. And in 2000, we did the last action. That's when I got involved. In 2000 was the last big action focusing on bringing the growers to the table to talk about how to eliminate all of these abuses. There were situations of beatings in the fields, workers who were victims of violence. There were situations of modern day slavery that the coalition was investigating. And in 99, when one of the cases was closed, I was able to meet with some of the workers who were part of this case, the Cuello case. Those workers were bought and sold on the side of the road. That was the arrangement they made. And then they were placed on a dilapidated trailer on the middle of the swamp. They were able to escape. Eventually, with the help of the coalition of Immokalee workers, the case was prosecuted. And through them, I met the CAW. Our boss didn't pay us. We became homeless while working, and end up in that situation where we met and we started to participate. I started to participate with them. So 2000 was the last big action in Immokalee. From that point, we started to analyze the market because we knew that even with hunger strikes that lasted up to 30 days in 1997, beginning of 98, 3,000 workers each time of the 3 times that the coalition did general strikes in 95, 97, and 99, marches against violence, and the march in 2000 for dignity and dialogue. We were just looking for a place on the table, but we were not even considered humans. Why do I say this? Because back then, when the hunger strike of 30 days happened, relatively small in comparison with the biggest growers, farmer, talked to this farmer and asked him, why not sit at the table with these workers? We know that they have been in this hunger strike and some of them have gone to the hospital in really bad shape. Why not? Why not sit at the table? You don't have to consider anything, but at least give them that. Don't you think they have earned it? He said, I'm going to put it to you this way. A tractor doesn't tell a farmer how to run his farm. That pretty much encapsulated the mentality of this industry that I was making a reference to at the beginning. And that was what we were up against. It was not just eliminating abuses. We were fighting against every abuse. Since I started, there's been all kinds of situations that we have pushed against in terms of abusive behavior. In 2000, we started to talk after this action where the growers just basically received us with closed doors. And we started to analyze how. And we started to actually take a different look at the questions we were asking. We were asking the question of the activists at the beginning without knowing. We simply wanted abuses to stop. But what we needed was to ask the question of the economists. Who's benefiting the most? Once you ask that question in different settings, I bet you are gonna have a connection. Interesting connections are gonna emerge. And for us, it was the retail food industry. And it was the big brands of fast food. And when we analyze it, 40 years prior to that moment, corporations like McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, they didn't exist in the way they do today. They were small enterprises, small ideas, flirting with the creation of food in the same fashion as the car industry. One worker does one single job every single day, all day, each day that there's work to do. And it became very popular because it was very fast. They started to grow, and with their growth, they started to demand the size of the tomatoes they needed, the quality, and the state of maturity, but overall, the price. When they pushed onto that, and then you go back to why wages were stagnant, you're going to realize that the 30 years of stagnant wages are directly connected with the pressure that has been constantly growing and placed on top of this industry that is forced to cut costs of production with us. They're not free of guilt. They all benefit, but those who benefit the most are the ones at the top. And that's why we started with the campaign that we call the Campaign for Fair Food. Many of you probably know us more for that than for what it's happening, on the ground in Immokalee, because it was a very public, very visible campaign. Lasted 4 years. We were alone. After 4 years of boycotting, that was the first boycott that we declared, and it was after several attempts at communicating with them. More than 300 universities stand in solidarity with us. Several universities started the campaign of Boot the Bell, which was aiming to cut contracts with Taco Bell in their universities and or sponsorships for the athletic departments, for example. And when that happened, more than 25 at the moment, I think, of the signing of the agreement with Young Brand executives, which are the top, of they are the company that owns Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and other brands. Together, they are the largest brand, the largest conglomerate of fast food in the planet. They came to the table and they signed because there were students that kicked 25 contracts, and I think three more just in case, just because it took them 4 years to realize that it was the right thing to do. Since that moment until today, we have 14 agreements, including Taco Bell, McDonald's, Burger King, and I forgot to mention the involvement of consumers. It was not just students, it was people of faith, it was other organizations of workers, it was every consumer of conscience that had an opportunity to march with us, stand with us, made it possible. So Taco Bell, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Whole Foods, even Walmart. So in 2011, we were able, because of the campaign for fair food that we launched since 2001, we were able to bring all of these corporations to create the fair food program. In 2011, that's when we implemented covering 90% of the tomato industry in the state of Florida, companies that are based here but have land all over the East Coast. So these companies came on board to apply what we call the Fair Food Program, which is inside this booklet. This booklet we give them to workers in sessions of education. Inside the booklet, there are rights like the right to be able to receive a penny per pound, the right to complain without retaliation, to work free of sexual harassment, the right to work free of modern day slavery. There's zero tolerance policies for modern day slavery, sexual assault, and child labor. All of those are prohibited, and any other abuse that's reported and not addressed and resolved can become a zero tolerance, because the moment in which a company is in non-compliance with the Fair Food Program, that is the moment in which they are not going to be able to sell. An ultimatum or time for them to fix the problem that is reasonable is going to be given, and if they don't fix it, then they can be excluded from the Fair Food Program until they fix the problems. So this is what happened in 2011. It is covering more than 30,000 workers, according to numbers from the industry itself. And the reason why this has been so successful, because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about results, but the reason why this is so successful, it's because the program incorporates legally binding agreements with each corporation that have signed. We have signed those agreements, and they are obligated by law to comply with what we have agreed. And buyers are committing to cut purchases when necessary to leverage the power they have always used. But when they used it in the past, they never ask about the well-being of farm workers. They never really look into human rights or just the bare minimum compliance with the law. None of them do anything like that. They care about business, but with these agreements, they have to care about protecting workers, because that's their ability to do business in terms of the growers. A code of conduct that's drafted by workers themselves. Some of the rights that are included here, including the right to not overfill the bucket with tomatoes, was created by workers themselves, because it's 10% less tomatoes on your shoulder each moment that you are carrying that bucket, which means a lot at the end of the day. But it also means 10% increase in production that for the first time is going to be paid to you. Since the program started to be implemented in 2011, wages went from 40 to 45 cents per bucket to 65 and 70 cents in the span of 8 years. Now the industry, tomato industry is not going to say that was because of us. But the reality is, in the moment in which we bring an entire industry to invest itself to create structures for shading the fields, which is something that we have in every field, and it's a requirement, and it has to be within walking distance from workers in case they need it. There are protections in regards to COVID right now. I'm not going to talk about that because I know this is not about that conversation specifically, but we created because of that, because the model, the Fair Food Program, was existing within this pandemic too. It responded, and now we have the first ever protocols to protect workers in agriculture in the US, and I dare to say maybe in the world. I don't know. But my point is that is the power of the market. That is what the participation of workers, not just in drafting the code, but in making sure that it works. It's extremely important. The worker-to-worker education, as that I was mentioning, we go to the fields. The companies have to pay for the time workers spend listening to their human rights being applied in their place of work, which is unheard of. Before we would be chased by the police if we attempt to do that, and we were. 24/7 trilingual complaint investigation and resolution mechanism, staff from start to finish. This is something that also includes indigenous languages. We don't put it there because, you know, there's something that we adapt as it is needed. Whenever there are workers that speak an indigenous language in our staff or among the members of the central committee, we can reach out and have that communication happening in real time in their own languages. And then the auditing, it says as a minimum 50%. When you look at reputable brands or those who claim that they are reputable in the arena of auditing, when you don't have legally binding agreements, you don't have the power to really go and audit anything. Much more less when in the cases like, for example, with Wendy's or other corporations. By the way, boycott Wendy's. None of them really do anything to empower workers to defend themselves against abuse, to make sure that the system works. But they claim they have. These brands work for them. That's what most corporations do. They enter into agreements that are not requiring anything concrete from them, that are aspirational at best, or they change something that is convenient for the company at the moment, and they will stop it as soon as they leave. These are the elements that make basically the results be possible. Now, I know that I am at the minute 15. I'm sorry, I'm about to finish. Um, the auditors go and speak to the workers. They also receive, the complaints 24/7. And when we say 24/7, we mean it. The line, they are proud that Fair Food Standards Council, which is the organization in charge of these stats, is proud of saying that the phone never goes to voicemail. And that's the commitment they have. They take turns taking the line, and no phone call will go to voicemail. The results of this approach, and this is outdated, and that's the beautiful part. This is the one that I love the most. These are the results. Since the program launched in 2011, there's now $36 million that have been distributed among workers since 2011 until today. 2,500 complaints, now it's 3,000. 7,700 violations uncovered in the process of investigation of complaints and auditing. Now it's 10,000. All of those resolved, all of them ranging from every problem that we imagine, but the nature of the problems have changed because the consequences are always for those who commit the abuse, not for the workers who are reporting, who are trying to get justice. That's the difference. And these just wages that were recovered because they also received complaints about that from outside the program sometimes. And this is a magic number, 0. When you create a system that works like that, you don't need to have situations in which workers need to, be calling to report that they were discriminated against. If you have a system that deals with that in the field, that's beautiful. And it's very fast. It's in less than a month. All the cases, less than a month. Most of the cases, I think, in less than 2 weeks. 80%, I think, in less than 2 weeks. But don't quote me on that. So this is the power that when we started all of these, we never knew that we were going to be connecting with colleagues across the United States and colleagues across the world. But the model, the Fair Food program, is what gave, basically the elements that I mentioned is what gave the idea to start to create a model that could be applied, could be replicable in other realities. So that's where we met with migrant justice. Many workers from different parts of the world started to call us. We were very happy when migrant justice and we started to talk about all of this. We started to do exchanges. They were shadowing some of the process that we were also developing, and implementing of the education sessions, shadowing that process, helping us organize one of the actions to see the campaign aspect of it and see how we organize also in our context. And that's how we started, to talk about this idea. They pursue their own model, and now they have it. I'm not going to talk about that, but it is beautiful. So, and please pay all the attention you can to our friends, Abel and Doc, who's going to talk with us from Setul, Abel from Migrant Justice, and Doc from Setul talking about the construction, two different models that have emerged. The protections that we created for the fields are also being used in the textile industry in Lesotho in regards to sexual assault, sexual harassment, more focus on that. And also in Bangladesh, protecting workers in regards to their health and safety. So I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to say it's an honor for us to be part of this conversation. Thank you for inviting us. And yeah.
Thanks, Gerardo. I think that set up the rest of our panel perfectly. So yeah, so one strategy that the groups behind this model has pursued is creating the worker-driven social responsibility network, which is the organization that I work for. And so worker organizations, allies, technical advisors in 2015 came together to found the network to expand, promote, and replicate this model, because this set of principles really works in all of these different environments. And so now we exist to field the many inquiries that we're going directly to the CIW and to sort of help connect different experts on practicing the WSR model with new worker groups who are interested in pursuing it. So I'm going to briefly share a video about the network and the model, and then we'll hear from Abel and Doug. All right.
Sarah, I think you need to share your computer audio. You might need to stop it and reshare with the computer audio on.
Got it. Thank you.
When you're sharing it, you should see the option to share computer audio before you click share. You see that?
Got it. I'm sorry, it's going to take me just 1 minute. Why don't I put that together? And in the meantime, if we can go over to you, Abel, to talk a little bit about migrant justice.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. All right, hi everyone. My name is Abel Luna, and I'm an organizer with Migrant Justice. It's an organization based out of Burlington, Vermont. And it's a pleasure to be here with Gerardo, with Doug, and Sarah, and all of you to share a little bit about our work. Um, just yeah, and thank you to everyone that was able to put this together and inviting us to be part of the panel. I'm going to share a little bit about of the migrant justice, how we started our work, how we do our work, why do we do it, and an update on the Meal with Dignity program. And we're going to end with some actions that you guys can take to support migrant farm workers in the state of Vermont. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. Yeah, just a very briefly about migrant justice. It's an organization that started about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, after the death of Jose Obed on the top left. It's a teenager from Chiapas, Mexico, Jose Obed Santis Cruz, who was a farm worker here in the dairy industry and died on a workplace accident, an accident that could have been prevented if the right staffing, the right equipment had been in place. And so that was really the beginning to the conversation in the community in Vermont, that there was migrant farm workers maintaining and sustaining the dairy industry. Some of the most famous brands of ice cream, cheese, milk, and so on. And that was also the beginning, the spark amongst the migrant community, amongst workers to come together and to talk about the issues that people were facing on the farms. And it started, meetings in worker houses, and then in church basements and university rooms. Basically trying to find a safe space to share our story, and to come together, share a meal, and together figure out a solution. And since 2009, that in those very few years, those first years, that's how the migrant community in Vermont defined our human rights agenda, or our human rights map, which includes the right to freedom from discrimination. We are a border state, and Border Patrol is always hunting the community down. Freedom from discrimination, access to healthcare, freedom of movement, and also work and live with dignity. And that has really been the recipe for success in migrant justice, with the community asambleas, community assemblies. And through that, we've been able to achieve amazing human rights, such as the driver license here in Vermont, to stop deportations, to create one of the strongest policies in the country to continue the collaboration between law enforcement and Border Patrol, ICE. But we have always maintained a focus on the right to fair working conditions and fair living conditions. And why is that? And so if we go to the next slide, over the past few years, Migrant Justice has ran a couple of surveys. And some of the things that we learned from the surveys, and these were worker to worker surveys, so farm workers working on farms, going to visit other friends on other farms and doing the surveys, to really understand what was happening. And we learned that 80 to 90% of the farms that were surveyed are hiring migrant farm workers. And sometimes these farms are very small, with 70, 100 cows, to 1,500 plus cows. And you have small farms, you have farms that are very isolated, and that creates invisibility for workers and conditions that are ripe for human right abuses, because workers are living where they work and they work where they live. Sometimes it's all housing. Sometimes there's 4 people per room, 2 to 3, or even more people per room. Sometimes there's no drinking water on the housing, and sometimes there's no heating. And we're talking about Vermont. It gets negative. It gets really cold here, so it's a really dangerous situation. Some other issues that we learned from the surveys, is high percentages of accidents happening, or injuries, because people are working with chemicals, all day long. People are working chemicals, heavy machinery. You're working with hundreds of pound animals. It's really easy to get injured. There's lack of protection, PPE, personal protective equipment, and there's also lack of access to healthcare. And so all of these labor, exclusions, lack of labor, rights that we have in the dairy industry, expose workers to sexual harassment, to gender discrimination, unjust firings, human trafficking. That is the reality that farm workers are facing in their industry in Vermont. And I don't want to say that in every single farm there's the same situation. I don't want to paint every single farm with the same brush. There are farms that are treating workers right, that are paying good wages, that have good housing, but we cannot turn the blind eye when some of these issues, are happening on farms. Um, and so, if we go to the next slide, we have to ask ourselves, why are conditions like this? Gerardo described it beautifully when he was describing the corporate structure. Um, but after learning all of these issues, right, we have to ask ourselves, sort of, why are these things happening, and why are people facing these conditions on the farm? And we have to look at the root of the problem. And that's when we have to look at the corporate supply chain, and corporations who at the end of the day are taking home all of the money. They are getting richer, while workers continue to face the same conditions every single day. We went down. Gerardo mentioned we went down to Florida. We learned about the Fair Food Program, working to workers, talking and so how the model's working, and just learning everything about it. And so we brought it over to Vermont, and started implementing it in the dairy industry. Um, and basically what that means is that, corporations, migrant justice signs legally binding agreements with corporations, where they take responsibility for the human right abuses that are happening in the farms where they're buying the milk. And those corporations commit to paying a higher premium, to the farms that are participating on the program. And the farms, when they receive the premium, they commit to use it to comply with the code of conduct, that Gerardo was mentioning is the same thing in Vermont. That was written by workers themselves and represents the definition of dignity, for dairy farm workers in Vermont. Um, and so all of these standards and rights and everything, are meaningless. For example, if workers don't know how to access their rights, if workers don't know what to do, in case there are human rights violations on the farm. And so one of the things that we do is education. We go to the farms, we facilitate education, the rights under the program, how to access these rights. And through that process, workers become frontline monitors of their own, their workplace. Um, and that's all great, but if we don't have an enforcement mechanism, if we don't have like teeth that are actually enforcing everything in the code of conduct, it doesn't mean anything. And so migrant justice, similar to this coalition and Immokalee workers, we built the Meal with Dignity Standards Council, which is the similar to the Fair Food Standards Council. What happens is that they monitor the conditions on the farm, they respond to complaints, and also they audit all of the farms, every single farm on the program, and they interview workers, every single worker on the farms. And if the farm isn't compliant with the code of conduct, the Meal with Dignity Standards Council can suspend the farm. The farm loses its premium and the ability to sell to the buyer. In this case, Ben and Jerry's. Um, and so if we go to the next slide, very, very, I think is the next one over. Yeah. And so, Ben and Jerry's was the first company to sign on to the Meal with Dignity program. And there's no company that is just gonna sign a legally binding agreement. They're gonna kick back and they're gonna scream and they're gonna do everything it takes to not take responsibility. They're gonna look for other ways out, other solutions, other fake solutions that are out there. And that was the case with Ben and Jerry's. It took 3 years to get them to sign the Meal with Dignity program, but they did. And by doing so, that represents 20% of the dairy industry here in the state of Vermont. It's now under the Meal with Dignity program, covering over 250 workers. Um, and, uh, and so, yeah, what are we up to now with Meal with Dignity? If we go to the next slide. So basically, we release our biannual report from 2018 to 2019. And you can go to millwithdignity.org and you can download the full report. There's a lot of data and information and a lot of up-to-date information on the program and the progress. But I'm going to share a little bit of that. So if we go to the next slide, some of the successes on the Meal with Dignity program in the first 2 years. It's been that has been over $1 million that has been invested in farm worker rights. $200,000, over $200,000. It's a little bit outdated. Has passed directly through to workers in forms of bonuses. $800,000 in improvements to working and housing conditions in order to meet the code standard, and including over $500,000 in raises to meet the minimum wage, paid vacation and sick leave. We now in the pandemic, that was it's a game changer, having paid sick leave. Improvement to worker housing, and construction of new housing units, personal protective equipment, and other changes that have resulted in workers, better safety for workers. And just a very quick quote from workers on the program. We wouldn't want to work anywhere else. It wouldn't be the same after working on a farm with Meal with Dignity. And so that really speaks to the power of the program, and that is working. And so if we go to the next slide, very briefly, when we started in 2018, there was only 46% of the farms that were providing paid sick leave. You fast forward a year later, you have 81% of farms providing sick leave, and then a year later, we're at 100% of implementation. And that happened in a process of 3 to 4 years. That would have never had been possible without the Meal with Dignity program, without having an enforcement mechanism and a company that is behind supporting workers. And also important to understand that in 2014, when we started to run the surveys, over 60% of workers were getting paid $8.73 in Vermont per hour in Vermont. And you fast forward, 4 years later, 68, almost 70% of workers are earning the state minimum wage. And a year later, 2020, 2021, workers are earning now $11.75 per hour on Meal with Dignity farms. And that is a huge difference. That is not happening on non-Meal with Dignity farms. And yeah, that makes a difference in workers' lives. How many hours they're working and all of that. So it really speaks to the power of the program, and that it's working. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, please. Thank you so much. One of the things that Gerardo was talking about, was the education, and on the Meal with Dignity program, we go to the farms and we do education. And what's beautiful about that is that you have workers, you have the farmers, and you have managers that for years have been abusing human rights, and now everybody's together in the same space. Workers learning about their rights, farmers and managers learning about their responsibilities and the consequences of what happens if you violate workers' rights. And that's a game changer, because there's no one that's gonna come and show up to your farm and talk to you about like the rights that you have for housing or for better working conditions, or if you get injured on a farm. That doesn't happen. It's never gonna happen. Being a farm worker myself, and I never seen that. And so that it's really powerful. It's not just showing up and talking about the rights that you have, but also it's really about empowering workers to become frontline monitors and defenders of their own human rights. And so this is just a quote of a worker, Luisa, under the program. The education helped me learn a lot of things, because now we know our rights and that we have the freedom to speak up. Before, we didn't say anything because it was always, will they fire us? What will they say? And not anymore. Now we speak up without fear that we'll be fired. So that's a testimony from a worker on the Meal with Dignity program. It's now covering over 262 workers this year. We're at 100% education or implementation in Ben & Jerry's supply chain. And we just started the 2021 session. Yeah, so if that would, yeah, so that's something that we wanted to share. And we go to the next slide, just very briefly, the Build with Dignity program, was really effective, as Gerardo said, using the model during the pandemic, because on non-Build with Dignity farms, you don't have PPE during the pandemic. People were sleeping in overcrowded housing conditions, 2 to 3 people per room. So it was really tough for workers, not just in the dairy industry, but across across industries. In the Meal with Dignity program, Meal with Dignity Standards Council, was able to, to prove that the program works. And those are just some numbers and some examples on some of the things that happened during the pandemic. For example, delivering over 1,800 masks to farms under the program when there was no masks during the pandemic. Over 300 individualized conversations with workers about best practices. The Movie Dignity Standards Council created a set of guidelines for farmers to follow to make sure that workers were protected, and providing support around language and access to COVID testing during the pandemic as well. And one of the key ones, access to paid leave during the COVID-19. Workers that got sick, they were able to take time off and not lose money, not lose their wages. And on non-Meal with Dignity farms, that was a different reality. And so if we go to the next slide, what are we doing now? That was a little bit about the update on the Meal with Dignity program. But what we're doing now is we are pushing Hannaford's. It's a multinational, belongs to a multinational corporation called Ahold Delhaize. They have over $75 billion in profit a year. Ahold Delhaize has signed on to the Fair Food program. And so this is not something new to them. They know what it takes to make sure that they can say that there's dignity in their product. And so that's why we're pushing Hannaford's, because they are a large buyer of dairy in the Northeast with over close to 200 stores. And the last slide, it just has some information on the workers, some of the things that workers are doing, going to Hannah's supermarkets, taking pictures with their gallons of milk on their farms. And, so we're doing everything that we can, and we're going to continue to push them. We're going to be that rock in their shoe, just like we did with Ben and Jerry's until they sign onto the program. We know they're going to sign on, just a matter of time. It's happening, and we need all of your support. So if, on the last slide, we have some information on migrant justice and things that you can do. You can check our website and get involved, sign up for our news. That was.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abel. I'm conscious that we are a little bit close on time. I think our Q&A section will be quite short, so I want to encourage folks to drop any burning questions they might have in the chat. And then I'm going to turn it over to Doug next, and we can close on the video if we have time, but I want to make sure we hear from Doug. Doug, please tell us about the new expansion into construction and the Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council.
Sure. So I will keep this pretty tight because you've just kind of heard in nice detail about 2 other examples, kind of this initial one in Florida and then kind of the second expression in the United States anyway. In Minnesota, similarly, similar to CIW and to Migrant Justice, a worker organizing center, CETUL, has been in existence for about 14 years. And they've done a lot of work with a variety of different communities of workers, perhaps best known for some work in retail cleaning and a variety of other places. But throughout the years, a steady crew of workers coming and organizing with the center have been in construction. And all through those years, 25–30% of the workers coming in the door with wage theft issues, safety issues, other kinds of violations have been construction workers. And CETUL, using many of the same tools shared among the kind of workers' rights community around the country, have kind of conducted a variety of fights and organized workers and and taken on wage theft claims and labor bosses and labor brokers and individual contractors. Lots of wages recovered, lots of individual fights with really meaningful success, and yet really a sense that the industry was not changing. And what we have in Minnesota really is sort of a tale of two industries. On the one hand, sort of large scale construction, big downtown office buildings, large multifamily housing, heavily unionized. Our partners in the building trades have done terrific work in organizing workers and building what are really, really fine standards in a lot of ways in that side of the industry. And then you really have kind of the other half of the industry, small multifamily, small kind of one-story commercial, single-family homes in the suburbs, kind of a variety of sort of other sectors of construction where, as one worker put it, it's the Wild West, right? Where workers are being, there's sort of infinite layers of subcontracting where a contractor is hired and they hire a sub, and you end up with a labor boss who goes out and gathers workers. People are being paid under the table. We've had one successful labor trafficking case in the last year, and 3 more that are currently kind of public and in prosecution. Incredibly unsafe conditions. I've had a couple of workers killed in the last year. Again, continuing a lot of wage theft. Very low wages, very unstable working conditions, and kind of this core group of workers, like those at Migrant Justice and at CIW, said, we got to look at the power in this industry. We got to find a way to take the whole industry on, and so really turn to this WSR model. This isn't strictly speaking a supply chain like it is in agriculture, but it's kind of a contracting chain, right? With at the top of the chain, really the developer, who kind of holds the power, and who has traditionally said, well, I don't have anything to do with workers, right? I don't hire the workers. I raise the money, I design the project, all that stuff, but contractors hire the workers. And so really this, again, in a somewhat parallel way that you just heard, workers said, well, wait a minute, we've got to find a way to hold developers accountable at the top, those who are making the money, to the treatment of workers on the ground, on the building site. That's the WSR model lends itself to that. And so really, again, Satul said we need a monitoring organization like Fair Food Standard or Milk with Dignity, Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council, my organization. They kind of built from the ground up. With a long multi-year worker process, we developed a code of conduct for construction work in the Twin Cities. And now basically the model, working much as it does in the other locations, is to sign developers at the top. And when they sign with BDC, they're basically committing that all contractors, every worker on their job sites will abide by the rules of the code of conduct. And then Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council is responsible then to kind of run the worker support line, audit the contractors as they come into the program, show up on the job site and interview workers, and be available to workers, again, as you heard in the other 2 models, ultimately to create the space that workers need to build power, right? That finally this isn't ultimately the goal isn't a sophisticated bureaucracy, though it can look like that a bit, right? But the goal is space for worker power building. The goal is that workers can say, hey, I can actually stand up for my conditions. I can actually educate myself and speak out without feeling like I'm going to get threatened or kicked off a job site. And where workers begin to have this seat at the table with big developers in deciding how workers are going to be treated. That's kind of, in a nutshell, what we're doing. This is the first effort to move this model into construction, though we are also in dialogue with a number of other places around the country thinking about implementing the model in similar ways. And we're just we're kind of building out the program. As you know, many things going on in Minneapolis at the moment that have both created some challenges and some opportunities for us. And we are kind of excited. We're just hiring our kind of field staff, human rights investigators, and really getting ready to kind of go live on job sites in Minneapolis. So I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot more that could be said, but that's really kind of the heart of how we're hoping to kind of adapt this model and really build out, again, worker power in construction, in non-union construction in the Twin Cities and change this whole industry.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. Now that I've gotten a quick Zoom tutorial, I'm going to share this video, and then we have two great questions that have come in that I'm going to pose to our panelists. So we are, all right, attempt number 2.
From food and clothing to electronics, many of the goods we use every day come to us through supply chains. Atop the supply chains are name brands with instantly recognizable logos. In recent decades, these companies have experienced remarkable growth. Mega buyers now wield unprecedented market power to purchase goods and services as cheaply as possible, pressuring suppliers to cut prices or lose out to their competitors. This price pressure drives employers to cut wages and push workers even harder. Sweatshop conditions and dangerous workplaces are the norm. Forced labor and sexual violence take root as well. While much of this exploitation is invisible to consumers, disasters sometimes pierce the veil. To each of these tragedies, corporations respond with crisis management public relations, promise to do better. They point to their voluntary standards without enforcement. Unsurprisingly, nothing changes for workers. But what if there were another path? In recent years, workers have developed a new paradigm for protecting their rights in supply chains. Worker-driven social responsibility has been tested from the agricultural fields of the United States to the apparel factories of Bangladesh. In these harsh environments, WSR has proven its ability to change workers' lives. Here's how. WSR is driven by workers themselves and based in legal agreements with brands at the top of supply chains. This ensures workplace standards are binding and enforceable. Suppliers who violate their workers' rights immediately lose their buyer's business. These agreements also commit brands to pay prices that allow for and incentivize suppliers to comply. Finally, WSR requires independent monitoring in which workers themselves play a frontline role. Real progress is seldom easy, but worker-driven social responsibility offers a blueprint at last to ensure dignified conditions for the 500 million people working in factories, farms, and other workplaces across the world who touch our lives every single day.
Wonderful. Okay, for sake of time, I won't say anything else, and let's just move right into the questions. So the first question we have is, a few states have passed bills to pay farm workers overtime, and Colorado's governor is expected to sign the Farm Worker Bill of Rights any day. How are y'all thinking about these bills? Are they one-offs? Do they offer enough protections? And why do you think farm worker bills are passing now? I see you have mute, Gerardo. Go ahead.
Well, from our part, I would say that those it's good that there are initiatives that the legislative channel it's being pushed, but on our context, and this is important, I think, for people in different places in the country. In our context, it doesn't really it is not better for us, the focus on the legislative challenges, because Florida is the South. It behaves politically as the South, and it seems to remember, a lot of how they wanted to keep things going. That's why farm workers today are excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed in the 30s, and it was accepted as a condition of exclusion of Black communities back then, who were doing these jobs in agriculture, and also, the workers doing the jobs in the homes, domestic workers were also excluded. And it was a racist reason. So I think that it is important to understand the context. When I see this, I think that is great. And I hope that it works. For us, I think that we have a better chance at expanding these protections and empowering more workers, which is, the model that we are pushing. By bringing more corporations. In our specific case, in the fields, if we bring other corporations like Kroger, if we win, when we win, not if, when we win the boycott of Wendy's, and if we bring a couple other brands, I think that we're gonna have enough buying power to bring the entire retail industry in this country. When that happens, we're gonna expand this, and that's where we want to get. Not to disqualify. I know that there are settings, there are spaces in which laws are different. California, for instance, is different in that regard. We would love to have overtime paid for workers across the United States. That would be beautiful. And we can push for that too down the line. But as it is now, I think that pushing for more corporations will give us an opportunity to be able to change and to be able to do it in a way that's verifiable. The one last thought is there's many ideas out there that fail to bring what they are saying they are supposed to do in regards to human rights, because they don't empower workers, because they don't include them, because they don't include legally binding agreements, or because they are just agreements based on a shake of hands, on the willingness of some corporations. What I'm going to recommend is please go to the MSI Integrity Report. It's called Not Fit for Purpose. There's 40 different initiatives that were analyzed by Harvard for the past 10 years, and they show why this model makes sense, why the Fair Food Program, it's very unique among all of these different approaches, so that we don't get confused with what works and what doesn't. And here you have 3 examples, solid examples of how it can be done, and we want to continue doing that. Obviously not, what we want is change, whatever the route. That's what I want to make very clear. And for us, this makes sense in this context, in this geography. So we'll keep pushing.
Great. Okay, we've got many more excellent questions coming in the chat. If our participants are up for it, I'd like to invite everyone to stay an extra 5 minutes if you have it to finish getting answers to these questions. So I'm going to read a question that came in to me from an international participant. Not familiar with the situation in the USA, but I wonder where the labor unions are in all of this. Aren't they supposed to be able to represent workers' rights? And do you still see a role for labor unions to promote labor rights in the sectors where you work?
Maybe I'll start that one just to say, just because we are operating uniquely to these other 2 programs, again, corporate power of old was able to keep agriculture right out of the National Labor Relations Act, as Gerardo just said. In construction, that is not the case. And so, in fact, we are working closely with labor unions here in Minnesota that, again, have been very successful in parts of construction, and who are really joining us in this effort to kind of try to bring justice to other parts of the industry, parts that are just in a really, really tough shape, and that frankly traditional, even frankly very creative models of construction organizing have not been able to breach, right? And this is so 12 years of my life have been full-time in the labor movement, and so I really come out of with that sort of labor lens and union lens. And so we really see this as an opportunity to engage labor in this fight as well, but also, like I say, to get to parts of this industry that, at least so far, kind of construction organizing models haven't been successful in. And we think in some cases, BDC may provide a first step that ultimately leads to some of these workers being able to be under traditional union contracts. In other cases, it may be that again, this model really continues to fit that part of the industry for kind of a whole variety of reasons that I better not try to go into now. But yeah, absolutely, we see ourselves as working alongside. I often talk about our work as part of the labor movement, and I certainly talk about what Gerardo and Abel and the other parts of WSR are doing in the same way.
Wonderful. Thanks, Doug. Another really interesting question. I would love to hear the speaker's advice on how a WSR program could be set up in this situation. A poultry processing plant produces packaged chicken for a privately owned large grocery chain in Texas, HEB. The poultry processing company has been the target of pressure from a worker center in our town with some success, but short-lived. Some of the plants are union plants, which potentially complicates things with the WSR program.
I mean, from our side, I would say the Fair Food program and then the model that emerges out of it, the reason it works is the same reason why it works in other contexts, right? We see the examples of Setul, the examples of migrant justice, but then we also see how in the setting of Bangladesh, for example, I mentioned that earlier, we're talking about unions there, like 1.5 million workers, from what I understand, that are impacted by the reinforcing of that the Bangladesh Accord with the provisions, that make workers in the fields safe. So when you think about that, the model really can be applied in any setting, as long as it considers what is the goal here, which is, in one hand, protect the workers against retaliation, guaranteeing that they are free to speak. And then in the other end, having concrete and legal commitments from those who have the power to make sure that the workers can speak freely. And then bring the production, the bosses, the owners of those factories to also understand that things are going to be done different as a condition of doing business. I think that really we could do many things here in the US. In our context, if so happens that we're excluded, it's not that we, is that an option as it is now, but if it changes, we'll embrace it and we'll work with it. As I was saying, we work with what works. And I think that the WSR model is really a great opportunity for workers in other contexts. We're in communication with Venceremos, which is an organization of poultry workers in Arkansas. And they are aiming to implement the model. They are actually doing all the work that Migrant Justice was doing in trying to learn, coming to Immokalee, see how it works, and they are trying to see how to land it. They have currently a campaign of Tyson pushing them to do the right thing, and they need your support. If we support efforts like that, they have the possibility to come to fruition. So I don't think that it is unimaginable. I think it's a little difficult to bring that to poultry as it is now, but we supporting that will be able to change the context so that we can pursue it.
Yeah, and the follow-up question that just came in on that is, should the pressure be on the grocery store instead of the poultry company? To which I think we can say yes. A lot of times, the poultry company, the garment factory owner, the farm owner, might not actually have the power to make those changes based on the price pressure that's put on the supplier, on the person in that role by the buyer. So by including the buyer, it's by including that brand, you're able to enforce the consequences on the suppliers. Great. Gerardo, did you want to add anything on that?
No, just say that the communities, know what's best. So this whole idea of empowering work is the whole notion of why we exist as a network also. it's to be able to replicate this, to be able to generate the opportunities, identify those who are seeking them, and work with them to land those ideas. That is what makes it work. And you know, for us, anything that help us achieve that, it's welcome. And what I would say is just that we need to be able to act on these, because I think that many of these ideas just stay in our minds. We learn about it, but we don't necessarily participate as actively. And I think that that's what's needed. More people supporting efforts, standing in solidarity with the workers, not because we're asking them to do that, but because we have already set up the table for everybody to eat. So we deserve the same.
That was phenomenally well put, and I can't think of a better note to end on. So I think we'll draw to a close there. Thank you so much, everyone, especially for sticking around extra time in your day. I really appreciate it. I think this was an incredible conversation that I look forward to continuing. So thank you so much to our panelists and to all for participating.
Pleasure. Thanks.